All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about the man who inspired one of the most famous monsters in all of fiction.
But what if I told you the real guy was maybe even more terrifying than the legend he inspired?
Yeah, we're talking about a brutal prince who ruled entirely by fear. This is the story of Vlad III, Prince of Wallachia, though you probably know him by his other name, Vlad the Impaler.
Okay, so first things first, we've got to separate the myth from the man, the pop culture legend from the historical reality.
So, you know Bram Stoker's novel from 1897? That gave us the famous vampire we all know. But the inspiration for that character? That came from a real 15th century ruler whose actions were, honestly, the stuff of nightmares. So forget the fangs, forget the cape. The real story is all about politics, brutal warfare, and a prince who shed an absolute ocean of blood to protect his homeland.
So to really get who this guy was, you have to understand the world that made him.
Vlad was born into a world that was just constant conflict. I mean, his home, this principality called Wallachia, it's part of modern-day Romania, was stuck right between two massive superpowers. You had the Christian kingdom of Hungary on one side and the expanding Ottoman Empire on the other. It was the definition of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Alliances were always changing, and you were never, ever guaranteed to survive.
And this is where his name comes from, which is super interesting. See, his dad, Vlad II, he was part of this Christian knighthood called the Order of the Dragon. Their whole job was to defend Christianity from the Ottomans. Because of that, he got the nickname Dracula, which means the dragon. So naturally, his son, our guy Vlad III, became known as Dracula, which literally just means son of the dragon. So you see, this name we think of as so evil, it actually started out as a title of honor.
But that title of honor wouldn't last. A really traumatic childhood spent as a hostage would end up shaping everything about him, his entire view of the world, and, his terrifying methods of rule.
So get this. To try and keep peace with the Ottomans, Vlad's own father sent him and his little brother, Radu, to live as political hostages in the Ottoman court. For almost 6 years, Vlad was basically a prisoner, totally immersed in the culture of the people who would become his greatest enemies. And he learned everything from them. Their language, how they ran their government, and, you guessed it, their incredibly brutal ways of fighting and punishing people.
And this time was absolutely critical. You see, his brother Radu, he kind of went along with it. He even converted to Islam and became good friends with the future Sultan Mehmed II, the same guy who would later conquer Constantinople. But Vlad? No way. He was defiant, he resisted the whole time, and he was punished for it. A lot. This is where he developed that deep, burning hatred for the Ottomans and that ice-cold, do-whatever-it-takes approach to power.
So, things get even worse. While he's away, his father and older brother are assassinated by their own nobles. So when Vlad finally fights his way to the throne in 1456, he is absolutely determined to lock down his power by any means necessary.
And let me be clear, Vlad's cruelty wasn't just random rage. Oh no, it was a cold, calculated strategy. He wanted revenge on the local nobles. They were called boyars, because he blamed them for his family's deaths. There's this famous story where he invites hundreds of them to a big Easter feast and then has the older ones killed and the younger ones forced into slave labor. He used cruelty, especially his favorite method, impalement, as a political weapon. It was all about getting rid of rivals and scaring the living daylights out of anyone who even thought about crossing him.
And the sheer scale of his brutality, it's just staggering. Look, it's hard to get exact numbers from back then, but some historians estimate that the total number of people he killed, we're talking enemies, criminals, his own people, could be as high as 100,000. Just let that sink in for a second.
But here's the really terrifying part. It worked. He created this state of absolute order, but it was built entirely on fear. Old stories from that time say you could leave a golden cup right in the middle of a town square and nobody would dare touch it. Not because people suddenly became good citizens, but because they were just paralyzed with fear of what he would do to them.
All right, so he's got things locked down at home, but that control is about to be tested in a major way by an outside threat. And that's what leads us to his most infamous act of all.
So in 1462, remember Vlad's brother's old friend, Mehmed II? Well, he is the Sultan now, and he just conquered Constantinople, so he's feeling pretty powerful. And he decides he's had enough of Vlad's defiance. He invades Wallachia with this absolutely enormous army. Vlad is outnumbered like big time. A straight-up battle, that would have been total suicide.
So what does he do? Well, since he can't win a fair fight, he decides not to fight fair. He uses everything he learned as a hostage against the Ottomans. He starts this brutal guerrilla war. He burns his own villages so they have no food. He poisons wells. He launches these terrifying surprise attacks in the dead of night. He even had his own soldiers dress up like Ottomans to sneak into their camps and cause total chaos.
But all of that was just the warm-up act. As Mehmed's tired, worn-out army finally gets close to the capital city, Targovishte, they come face-to-face with Vlad's ultimate psychological weapon.
Imagine this. Outside the city, the Sultan's army finds a field, stretching for miles, filled with the rotting bodies of about 20,000 captured soldiers and prisoners. Every single one of them was impaled on a giant wooden stake. It became known as the Forest of the Impaled. I mean, can you even picture a sight like that? And as a weapon, as a tool of pure terror, it was a masterpiece. This sight was so unbelievably horrifying that even Sultan Mehmed, this guy who had just conquered one of the greatest cities in the world, was completely shaken. The story goes that he was both disgusted and weirdly impressed by what he called a devilish understanding of how to rule. He basically said, "Nope, not worth it," and turned his whole army around. Vlad had won, not with swords, but with sheer, unadulterated terror.
But even though he won that psychological battle in a huge way, Vlad would eventually lose the war.
Turns out, his own nobles betrayed him. They actually preferred his brother Radu, who was much easier to control. So Vlad had to run. He fled to Hungary, where they threw him in prison for years. He did manage to make one last comeback in 1476 and got his throne back for a little while, but it didn't last. He was killed in battle against the Ottomans soon after, and in a final grim twist, his head was chopped off and sent to Sultan Mehmed as a trophy.
So, what are we supposed to make of all this? His legacy is, well, it's really complicated. To most of the world, he's the monster, right? The inspiration for Dracula. But if you go to Romania, his homeland, he's often seen very differently. He's remembered as this stern but ultimately just national hero. A guy who was brutal, for sure, but who did what he had to do to defend his country from being swallowed up by a massive empire.
And that really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Can a leader's absolutely horrific actions ever be justified if the goal is to save their nation? Was he a monster or a hero? A sadist or a savior? He was kind of all of those things at once. And I guess the answer really just depends on which side of the stake you happen to be standing on.